Hi, welcome to the Open Space with Aura. If you like what you see, please share it with your friends. Just letting you know, I'm not on any social media for certain reasons. So the only way for you to find me is through YouTube or through your friends. So please post your comments, and I would really appreciate if you share it with whoever you find appropriate. I have a person here, her name is Vesper, and it's the first time we meet today, right now. We met literally 2 minutes before this conversation starts. And I love this the most because it immediately creates the vibe of unpredictability, which is my favorite. And I don't know, probably I see Vesper is winking like, yes, something
Yes.
is coming, the thrill. And Vesper, I'm not going to introduce you. I'm going to dive into something, into words of one of my absolutely favorite writers, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the words from his book, Little Prince. So he writes, all grown-ups were once children, but only few of them remember that. You're an artist and I'm a musician, and I won't be able to be a musician, and I want to hear from you, if I wouldn't hold on to that child in me. And I believe all creativity springs from that source, the source of a childhood, which is complex thing. And one of the things about it, it's children are authentic and children are deeply apolitical before they grow up, and then something happens or not happens. So I would like to ask you, can you tell me a little bit about your journey and how your childhood, anything about it, good, bad, and ugly, informs your creative work?
That's such a great question. And I love that you framed it with The Little Prince because that's one of my favorite books. And my mom, one of the few positive memories I have with my mom is actually her reading me The Little Prince in French. So it's a special book. In fact, yesterday I was just wearing a t-shirt of The Little Prince. So
Oh my God, that's
yeah,
serendipity.
it is serendipity. So yeah, you can probably guess from that my childhood was less than ideal. It was a very I let's just say that I think that my path as an artist, my journey as an artist is not drawing from that childhood, but learning to reclaim the childhood that I didn't have. So I always saw myself as wanting to be in the service of children. So for as long back as I can remember, I was illustrating fairy tales. I was making up stories, drawing these things. And as soon as I became aware that one could do this for a living, I thought, there's no way I'm not going to do that. I have to create books for children because books were the thing that got me through my own childhood. And so a lot of it is reclamation for me. It's learning that there was a child there that can be spoken to, can be drawn out, can be healed, can be negotiated with, can be, and so, yeah, I directly see everything that I do in my work as that.
It's funny that you telling me all that, because I felt very isolated within my family. I'm not going to go into family drama now, but I felt
Mhm.
deeply isolated. And when my mom brought me to the library when I was very, very little girl, like 5 or 6, I don't remember exactly. The first thing I remember, it's that sensation of the smell of the dusty books, the old books. And for
Yes.
me, that was newly found kingdom, the escape, but escape where I could be with that thing, this majestic unknown thing, and the discover. Each book is a kind of travel, a journey, the discovering. And from that moment, I felt, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. I have companionship for life. And that's what music became to me.
So how did you become a musician and when did you start?
By rebellion. A lot of things happened by rebellion. My dad one day took me to evaluate to some musical authority, a very known musician, to evaluate the child. And that musician said, okay, your daughter has absolute pitch. So my dad said, okay, we have a gift here, we have to do something about it. So that's how it started. And I hated it. I deeply hated it. So books were my escape also from music.
Oh, wow.
Music was a torture. And then it was a torture until approximately age of 13, when I was teenager. And then my dad finally gave up on me. He stopped forcing me to do that thing. And he gave up, and I was flying. That I felt deep sense of liberation. But then I became very, very sick with horrible flu. And I remember it was winter. And I vividly remember that day when I was alone at home in my bed with high fever, and I felt miserable and wallowing in my misery. And I read all the books that we had at home, and I didn't take anything from the library. And I felt such a boredom and misery that something pushed me back to the piano. And I secretly started practicing because I was so proud I couldn't admit to my dad that I won that fight, finally, to liberate myself. And now I'm coming back to it. So that's how it started, restarted. Wow. But it was on my own terms.
Yeah. You know, there's something similar. My mom is a pianist as well. And trying to get me to play and take lessons, there was no greater torture than that. It was shame. It was all shame. And then I went to a performing arts high school, and it recontextualized it for me because I had all these friends who were just like me, who were amazing musicians. And so I secretly as well started to like reteach myself piano. And now, I mean, I play badly, but I've got some, Chopin and Beethoven, like a bunch of pieces that I'm working. I just got a new piano actually. So, and it's a delightful instrument. So
What model?
It's a Mason and Hamlin. Mm-hmm. It's like so it's a good instrument. And you know what? It was $100.
It's a somebody bargain. It's even better instrument now when you told me the price.
Yeah. It came through my son's teacher, and we had it tuned, and the tuner said it was a really good instrument. And so it's like I feel like I've gotten a new lease on life, and I can't stop playing. I play every morning before I start work. And it's amazing when you can take something out of its, like, I don't want to say always traumatic context, but it's negative context, and you can think about it a different way and it becomes your own. Then it's like pure delight. I mean, it
have to be on your own terms. And it's I often tell my students when I feel they reached some sort of, how you call it, dead end, not dead end, like a wall that they cannot break. I tell them, okay, quit. Go, quit. What? You want me to quit? Yes, I want you to quit. And 99.9% of these people always call me back. I miss it. I miss it. So, but the quitting sometimes is very important mechanism of coming back.
Yeah. This is on my mind right now because my daughter, who's a teenager, she dances. And she told me recently she wasn't sure she wanted to continue. And I kind of have this motto of like, nobody ever regretted taking piano lessons. They only regret quitting, when when they become adults. Um and so I don't want her to quit. I want her to examine the reasons why she wants to quit. But I also completely hear what she's saying, that sometimes you need to just like shed it,
You
shed
have
the
to
dead layers.
develop craving of it. Like you have to
Mm,
be on diet from it, like
yeah.
music-free diet or dance-free diet, just to regain appetite.
Yeah. Do you think
So
that's better when it happens young rather than like keep pressing yourself until you're, 40, 50, and then you burn out or something?
yes,
Yeah.
especially you have to allow a person to rebel.
Yeah.
You can suppress it, because if you suppress it, they will push back, and then they might never come back to it. It's like it propels the trauma. The
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the reverse psychology.
Yep. Yeah. Just
Yeah.
do
My
it.
kid.
Just quit. Let's see
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
happens.
Oh my goodness. My, my kids are both teenagers. My son is graduating from high school next month. And, my husband and I are both artists. And so we kind of had this kind of groovy mindset about raising our kids. Like, we're not going to give them any reason to rebel. Like, we're just going to let them do, if they want to like dye their hair and get piercings and, like be artists, and that's cool. Like, what do they have to rebel against? Well, my son decided he wanted to enlist in the military.
Here you go.
That's the rebellion. I mean, we managed to convince him to wait a couple years, after graduating high school, but it's still like his number one dream. And I'm like, this is exactly because his parents are artists. That's why he's doing this to us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's rebellion against absolute freedom of expression.
Totally.
Totally. Nope.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
But I
That's
think it's a stage, and we as parents, well, at least I do it, I don't know, we all make mistakes. I make mistakes as a parent. So I tell myself, sometimes the wisest thing, or you can do, is to allow yourself to be a bad parent. Stop preaching, stop moralizing, just let them do what they want to do. If you think it's deeply wrong, they have to realize it's deeply wrong. Otherwise,
yeah.
nothing would help. So I
Yeah.
just like put duct tape and just watch.
It's the hardest thing to do
I
because
know.
you know what's coming down the road and you're like, if you keep going this way, you're going to crash, but
No, because
sometimes they have to.
again, back to Saint-Exupéry, I remember what I've done and how I ran away from home when I was 14. And it just, you cannot stop this force. It's a force, and we cannot stop it as parents, and we should not,
Hmm.
unless it's has some criminal or
Sure.
mental.
Sure.
So we're not going that direction. But other
Yeah.
than that, it's normal process and formation of the individual.
Yeah.
It builds all these polychromatic textures,
So true.
the complexities, the trial and error.
Yeah.
Because formation of individual is a must creative process I can find in.
Yeah.
That's what formation of individual is.
Yeah. It's ironic to me, not ironic, but it's interesting to me that writing young adult novels became the thing that I'm doing, you know, because I always wanted to do picture books. I was really like interested in reclaiming that young childhood, like getting children when they're young to offer them these alternative pathways forward, right?
Mhm.
But then when writing young adult historical fiction came, like fell in my lap, you know, I had to really face that time period that you're talking about, like that individuation, the 16, 17-year-old self, and how vital that is, like how, and I mean vital like in terms of vitality, and like you're
Mhm.
saying, all the texture that starts to come out and get built as the brain is starting to,
It
solidify, and
stirs the pot. It's the
yeah.
brew. Yeah.
And you're realizing that you have, like, all of the choices are yours. You're coming out of the funnel of your parents, making decisions for you. And, as a parent, if you can allow that to happen, it can be really healthy. But there's all sorts of ways that kids, like, we don't want them to hurt themselves, but it's such a necessary part of it.
So we, as a parents, we cannot be censors of our
Right.
children. We talked a little bit about censorship.
Yeah.
So the parental censorship, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I reminded to myself all the time. It doesn't mean I don't have impulse. All the
Right.
time I have impulse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I have to just like stop, stop, stop. Put your feet
Yeah.
on the brakes.
Yeah. I'm really interested in that, in this subject of proper authority. Like, I was told for a lot of my life that I had a problem with authority, until I realized that actually I don't. I don't have a problem with authority at all. But as long as it's proper, as long as it's a healthy and proper use of authority that liberates people, that, like, gives people platforms, and, can create proper boundaries, but within those boundaries, freedom can flourish. You know what I mean?
It cannot be imposed authority. That's why, well, speaking of my childhood, I grew up in Soviet Union, where
Right.
there was like very interesting layers. There was one superficial layer of constant propaganda and authority of communist regime, but there was a dissident underground culture where luckily my father, who played jazz, and I've heard jazz at home since age 3, and jazz was part of what it was called in Russia capitalist evil. And it's funny because in the United States, certain things that came from Russia were part of communist evil. So it's like double propaganda on both sides. So I'm interested very much in this imposed authority and push back against it. But that's another trap, because pushing back against authority, it becomes self-caging mechanism, because we stop being artists, we start pushing back against authority.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, there was, even in Russia, there was a huge layer of so-called dissident literature or immigrant literature, which never sounded delicious to me, because it narrows the field. It's through the lens of an immigrant, or through the lens of the dissident, or through the lens of anti-wokeness, through the lens of the anti-cancel culture. It's boring. It's boring. I don't want that lens. I want butterflies on the field.
Do you feel like that kind of, okay, so, all right, so I have a lot of questions about this, but I'm going to start from here. In a country like the United States, that, at least on paper, is like, has as its central ethos, individual liberty, right?
Mm-hmm.
And freedom of speech. And we kind of really do know, like, if we look at history objectively, that this is like the freest country that there has ever been, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that there is right now this huge explosion of protest culture? And do you think that it is, how do I put it? I'll throw it out there and just see how
Just
you
throw
respond
it
to that.
out there.
Yeah.
Let's see what sticks.
Yeah.
let me give you, okay, here is an imagery. Imagine yourself an orchestra. An orchestra has a conductor. Conductor has an expertise in bringing people together, people of different sorts, violinists, cellists, percussionists, trumpeters, they all from all over the place. Mm-hmm. They all have the individual expertise of playing the instruments. So they come to rehearsal. And speaking of authority, it's a voluntarily selected authority. They listen to conductor, and conductor listens to musicians, but musicians tune to each other. Otherwise, the orchestra will fall apart. Mm-hmm. Now, for musicians to tune to each other, they have to live outside of rehearsal room. Their identity, their political affiliations. It's not relevant if you're conservative or liberal or supremacist or black or yellow, or it does not matter. You enter that sacred space, the rehearsal room. I'm not talking about stage. That's another. Stage is a responsibility because people buy tickets. They want to get out of that political space into magical space. Mm-hmm. So I think we lost our responsibilities of sticking to our to our expertise, whatever that expertise is. Or, of course, the image of orchestra was metaphorical one. People, it's simple. If every person does what their talent and expertise tell them to do the best way they can, and strive to bring the best out of themselves and share it, it's a very viable, it's actually very practical. Mm-hmm. It's not utopian. Then this society as an orchestra will kind of naturally harmonize itself. Mm-hmm. So what's happened that all musicians now, the another scenario of how I see society today, that every musician cries in the corner, victimizing, or you're oppressor, you're the victim, it's not relevant. Mm-hmm. And we should just get back to our thing, to our work, whatever it is, creative work. So
yeah, it seems like there's a lot of pressure to be the whole orchestra at the moment, right? Where you have to get everything correct. You have to master the violist. Like if you're used to playing in the treble, in the treble clef, you have to also master the alto clef. Like you'd better. Mm-hmm. But that's out of your expertise, right? Like that's out of your own. You're not allowed to bring your life to the table without it being sort of totalizing. Does that make sense?
Can you elaborate a little more?
I guess what I mean is right now there's a body of thought, a body of social thought that is very focused on correctness. Well, we could say political correctness. We could say correctness of any kind, Yeah. And that if there's the slightest misstep out of that, then it's a judgment of your entire character, your entire life, and your entire right to be part of that orchestra at all. Mm-hmm. It seems like there's been a whitewashing of difference in the name of difference, maybe. Mm-hmm.
Or you can go into a realm of absurdity, to continue the metaphor. If violinists play Stradivarius, if violinists from Asia play a violin which was made by Italian maker Stradivarius, we can say, oh, you Asian culturally appropriating this. Or you can say, oh, you better change your instrument because it was made by that white male. So that's the layer of absurdity I'm refusing to go to.
Right.
It's
Right.
a
And
violin that makes beautiful sound, and you better play it well. And
Mhm.
then that's your contribution. Speaking of social cooperation, because
Mm.
that's, if I do my skill the best, I contribute to society as a whole.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, I love that. I'm going to really think about that orchestra metaphor. I think there's a lot to be drawn from there. I'm wondering too, in this moment where with all of this pressure, the pressure to be an activist, right? So I before we talked today, I was watching a video of these dissident artists from one was from Cuba, one from China, and one from Sudan. And they were talking about their respective governments crackdown on their art, on themselves as artists. And it's brutal, you know, what's going on. And yet we in the States, we're so focused on what's going on here in this protest culture where we have, you know, really the greatest freedom to be able to, if we choose to use it, if we choose to use it. Do you think that, okay, what do you think is the role of activism in art?
None.
Okay.
Let me give you an example. My
Yeah.
own daughter, she's in a field, she's doing PhD in a literary field in one of #1, I'm not going to name it, #1 high education institution in the United States, very famous. And when she went and did undergrad in a liberal arts, private liberal arts college, I remember as a freshman, she would come home and say, "Mom, why everybody is fighting for the cause? Why in my literature class or romantic English poetry class, I have to talk about a cause, about why everybody have to be an activist, or you just don't belong?" And I remember my conversation with her, and I said, "Well, Lisa, what do you think?" And she would say, "I don't want to be an activist. I want to appreciate a poem for what it is." And I said, "Well, you have an answer, stick to it." So, and she's sticking to it. She just not willing to accept. She's not willing. I call it groupthink. And the one thing I fight ferociously all my life is the groupthink. I'm a very passionate nonconformist.
Yeah.
So that groupthink, I'm on the other side of
Yeah, same.
So marching with the crowds, I'm always hiding in the bushes or run opposite direction.
Right. So in like the context of the Soviet Union, right?
Mhm.
So clearly, you know, you said there were underground, you know, jazz was an underground endeavor, right? So that wasn't that wasn't a public protest endeavor, right? That wasn't necessarily an activist endeavor, but it was dissident, let's say.
Dissident. Yeah.
So what's the difference between dissident and activist, do you think?
Huh. I'm thinking. Dissidents trying to preserve. Activists having seemingly the cause of preserving, but the cause of preserving with the cost of demolishing.
To demolish in the name of preserving.
Yeah, I think means justify the ends. That's how we,
Yeah.
whatever it takes, whatever it takes,
Whatever it takes.
whatever it takes. Yeah. Dissidents, they know the value of something and they are not willing to sacrifice it. and they dig the like wine cellars and go there and steep that wine or this delicious whatever there without bringing it to the surface because they know it will be butchered and destroyed.
Yeah, like almost like bringing it to the surface would make it oxidize and turn to vinegar, right? Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that image of the wine cellar. Yeah, that's really good. Um, yeah, literally underground.
Underground. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think we're heading that direction.
I think so too.
And
Mhm.
I'm excited about it. I'm excited about it. And I I see it around. I love Gen Z. I love Gen Z because they see bullshit through.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And I think even if they can bite on the hook of certain activism, but it's not for a long time. They're way too smart for that.
Yeah.
So I'm looking with excitement of what's going to happen.
Yeah, me too.
You gave that image of shading this all away because it's not real. And the one thing that I immensely respect Generation Z for, they want to reclaim real. They're
Yeah.
very pragmatic in a good sense. It's that healthy pragmatism. It's another thing that fascinates me about America.
In what
Creative
way?
pragmatism.
Hmm.
Yeah, what's viable and what's not viable. So I don't
Do
think what's happening now it's viable.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're gonna look back on this moment with a certain degree of, oh boy, I can't believe, you know, we went there, you know.
But we are not at the end of it yet. What do you
No,
think?
we're not.
I don't know.
Oh
I'm
no.
trying to evaluate where we are at.
I
And
don't think
so
we're yeah. I don't think we're near the end of it, but I think like commensurate with what's happening has to be this undercurrent of people going deeper underground.
Mhm.
Um, just for the sake of being able to say what they really think and mean, without being associated with like a very sort of binary or low resolution like set of parameters of like, oh well, if you're for freedom of speech then you're on the far right or something like that. I think people are just like, forget it. I'm like not even engaging in the conversation anymore.
No,
Like
it's boring.
it,
It's very
it's totally boring.
flat, one
Yes.
dimensional. Absolutely. And I, you as an artist, how many shades of each color we have? How many? It's all these chromaticisms, right? That's
Hmm.
what we're interested. I'm interested in all the spectrum of in-betweenness. I call it
Yeah.
in-betweenness. So
Hmm.
when you try to put me into this category or that category, hasta la vista.
Well,
So
yeah, and it's not even like you're when you're saying hasta la vista that you're doing it to be tough or something, or to be, it's just like I don't even like, I don't care, like
yeah,
like this is so
exactly.
boring, I don't even want to do this, like I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna go over here now, you know. You guys can have your conversation over there, but I like, I'm not interested in that
Yeah.
way of seeing humanity or art or relationship, or there's so many more interesting shades and colors, to deal with over here.
But you know what's I have no problem literally building connections with widest range of people
Absolutely.
without caring about their affiliations,
Right.
unless they are absolute fanatics,
Sure.
which are very rare pathological. It's already kind of mental pathology, which I'm
Hmm.
not going to get into here. But
Hmm.
most of people, I think we should just disengage, intensely disengage ourselves from using that language.
Yeah.
That language of classifications and external impositions of how to talk, how to think. I just don't engage in that language in the first
Right.
place of
There's a lot.
activism.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure. I mean, I know you work for an institution,
Yes.
and I do to a certain extent too.
Mhm.
Um, and there's a lot of pressure to, to get swept up or at least participate in those conversations. And it's tough to navigate because you don't want to um, take an unnecessary or premature stand on something when you could instead choose to just disengage, you know.
Yes. But what if there will be a moment where certain things will be forced upon us?
Then
In mandatory way.
Mhm. Well,
Oh,
I think that, Solzhenitsyn's essay, Live Not by Lies, is really, that's where you start. It's just learning to cultivate an allergy to lies,
mhm.
to saying things that aren't true, that you don't believe to be true. Um, yeah, and not looking for trouble, not looking for,
No. It's
you
not looking to fight the lies, but rather knowing exactly what your truth is and not
Mhm,
surrendering it.
mhm,
So it's that preservation. That's my, I know what I know what's important, what's
mhm.
vital to me, and I'm not surrendering it. That's
Yeah,
it.
in big or small ways, right?
Yeah,
There's
I'm
all
not
these.
looking for trouble on purpose,
Right.
but there's certain line. Nope, you're not entering that line. So I can give you example, concrete
Yeah, please.
example.
Mhm,
Well, speaking of Western classical music, I'm absolutely refusing to teach greatest music through the lens of uh, white supremacy, putting label on it that it's music of dead white males. Uh, just like I don't want to teach jazz or let's say Latin American music, which I'm passionate about, through the
mhm,
lens of that is Latinx music and that is a certain, that is Black music. No, it's a quality of music
mhm.
that matters. It's a beauty of music that matters.
Right.
And when I have students from all over the world, undergrads from India, who come to me and say, I want to play Chopin. I want to play that prelude of Chopin. And I say, couldn't you do it in India? No, we don't have it available. And I love
Wow.
this melody. Please, can you help me to get there so I can play?
Mhm.
Can I tell that student, you know what? This dude is a dead white male. Therefore, you're not going to play it.
I'm thinking about jazz too, just the history of jazz. Obviously, we all know that it, emerged from Deep South slave culture and how that, you know, changed and morphed based on, the surrounding culture and stuff, right? And then,
Yeah.
30s jazz compared to 60s jazz and how that grew and grew and grew. And then, it started to incorporate more and more demographics, right? So then you had like a Dave Brubeck, and then you had
Yeah.
like, a Joao Gilberto, and
I love Joao Gilberto. Oh
oh
my
my gosh.
God.
Actually one of my favorite jazz musicians right now, and I can't remember I'm gonna botch the name. Um, I think his last name is Mahanthappa. He's from India.
Mhm.
Um, it's like Rudresh Mahanthappa, something like that. I'll have to look up the name for you, but he's absolutely brilliant. I saw him play at Lincoln Center a few years ago, and I was like, "What is this music? It's so incredible." But just like jazz, that's the whole point of jazz. Like all of this music has its origins, which we
Yes.
can we can of course study and acknowledge and celebrate.
It's amazing what you said, the pulse of distant origin. That's what where music brings us. It springs from the earth. It's like all spices. Again, another metaphor, everything about food, right? The kitchen.
Yeah.
It's like, it's another spice. Why should I deny a certain spice? Why should I deny paprika in my meal because it's culturally appropriated? Or why can I? No, I want it all. It just
Right.
enriches me. So for me, all cultures, it's festivities. It's a celebration, and that's what jazz incorporate. That's what classical music incorporate. It's not cultural appropriation. It's enriching each other.
That's right.
It's that, like a Venice, like Venice was a big port in Italy where the trade would come from everywhere, like a Venice of the world. And anything that tries to castrate it, sorry, I'm using this word,
Yeah,
but
that's
strong
fine.
word. No.
Yeah, it seems to me like when you talked about paprika, right? Like, does paprika belong to Hungary, or does paprika belong to the Caribbean? Like, both cultures use it heavily. Which one does it belong to? Does it belong to Israel? Is like
Yeah.
it's, who can say who this like belongs to? And especially like I think we have this kind of misconception that up until 5 minutes ago, the world was this like close, that it's only beginning to open now or something, and that we're only beginning to discover each other's cultures now, and that we can put the genie back in the bottle, as it were, right? But the known world, let's say, has been a lot bigger for a lot longer than we think. It's not like when modern colonialism started, right? And we crossed, people crossed the Atlantic, that was when the world began. It's like, no, the world was very, very open centuries before that. You had the Silk Road, all the way from like Korea and Japan, all the way through India, all the way through Europe, and all the way to Britain, and then over to Iceland and Greenland and to Newfoundland. This has been
people in
1,000 years.
People in the Middle East, Muslims and Jews and Bedouins and Turks and Greeks, they all developed their hummus recipes and pahlava recipes. And they were, yeah.
And I mean, not even just that straight line, but then down into Africa, like people really knew about other parts of the world. Like this was not closed. Just that, I mean, because I write historical fiction, I think about this a lot. The misconceptions about the world as it has gone on for millennia. There's just so many misconceptions, and it's being reframed as something that is that can fit in a nice package and is neat, and that as human beings we're somehow evolving. It's like, it's just, or that we're going to evolve. No, we're not going to. This is it. This is how we are.
No, I'm thinking now about culture that fascinates me. It's a Moorish culture in Spain, which is fascinating. It's a blend. It's the mixology.
Yeah.
And people live together, and they, like roots of trees, they grow, they kind of branch, and they intertwine, and they learn how to navigate between themselves and form the fabric. That's how human fabric builds itself, weaves itself, weaving. Yeah. And something get distracted in this. I don't know, some disconnect happened lately. People not allowed, I don't know, we have to reclaim the word. Technology plays a huge role in connect and disconnect at the same time. what you
Yeah.
you're thinking.
It brings to mind some things that I realized in quarantine about our need for human connection and how that was even like the term social distancing to me is that's a slur. I don't use it.
I don't use it either.
No,
No.
that term, I don't know what evil person came up with that term, but it's such a manufactured, it makes me want to cry because what did you get from social distancing? Rising addiction, rising overdose, rising suicide, despair, a generation losing a year of school. Um, Nobody knows how to date. Our kids don't know how to date.
And they afraid each other.
They're
My
afraid of
son
each other.
told me that mom, girls terrified of boys and boys terrified of girls. And the huge rise of porno.
Yeah, that's destroying us. That we could
Yeah.
definitely talk for a while about how porn is destroying us. Yeah.
But another thing, the safetyism, I can go on about it.
Hmm.
Of course, we have to be, nobody denies the danger, right?
Right.
One part is to see clearly the danger, right? But another part is to enfold ourselves back into cocoon and hide in a closet. And that's where monsters get into our head, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's it's bad.
I mean, I heard, early on in quarantine when all the introverts made themselves known and said, "This is my best life. It's my dream come true. I get to just stay home with my cat and, I don't have to interact with anybody. I don't have to go to work and, I'm not exhausted. I'm energized, whatever." And it's like, well, I'm the only extrovert in my family. I mean, maybe even in my extended family, but definitely in my household. I've got these three other little introverts who were just like happy as clams. But it's like they need people. Even introverts need people. They need relationships. They need that. I've seen some friends of mine go to unhealthy places this year in their introversion where it winds up becoming very self-focused and self-referential.
Mhm.
And
Self-enclosement, like
yes,
back into
willful,
cocoon. Yeah. Yep.
willful self-enclosement.
Mhm.
That's not healthy either. We really, so, I mean, I'm trying to figure out ways that are decidedly anti-technology. I don't mean that technology's bad, but like a purposefully cultivated analog way of life that gets human beings back into my space, you know.
Mhm.
For my sake, yes, like because I need people, I'm an extrovert, I need people, but also because I think people need to be taught again, that it's okay to emerge and
Yes.
to relate to each other.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's going to be a long process.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I see it in little children that I teach, that they all vaccinated and I'm vaccinated, and they're afraid to take the mask off. And I tell them, well, I want to see your smile.
Yeah.
And it's a barrier that now we have to all cut. Like, it's okay to take the mask off.
Yeah.
And we have to unlearn. uh, we have to learn how not to be afraid.
Right.
Basics.
Yeah. When you talked about kids too, in Waldorf education, are you familiar with Waldorf?
This Waldorf,
Rudolf Steiner?
I
Yeah.
was a member of Waldorf Society for a few years,
Hmm.
and I have all Rudolf Steiner writings in
Yeah.
Russian that I
Oh,
brought
wow.
with me from Russia in my suitcase.
Wow.
I love Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I raised my kids They didn't go to Waldorf schools, but I raised them with a lot of that kind of ethic. And I made them handmade Waldorf dolls and, and I loved the concept of the Waldorf doll as this face, this neutral face to which the child could ascribe, they could ascribe their own meaning to that face.
Mhm.
And when you're talking about children wearing the mask or seeing everybody mask, like one of the there was an illustration in a children's magazine that came out last year
Mhm.
that made me so enraged. And it was a street scene of a father pushing his child in the stroller. And I don't think the child was masked, but the adults were masked. And there was no way to tell what the adults were doing or thinking. It was just their eyes.
Mhm.
And I just thought, this is so, I will say, abusive to children to eliminate their ability to learn how to read expression onto people's faces in the world. It's so wrong. It's anti-child.
It's anti-child and it's anti-social skill, because we read body language, we read
Yes.
gestures, we read expression, facial expressions, which are million. We losing the nuance.
Yeah.
Speaking of nuance, how nuance develops when we read each other's cues, and that's how we interact. So we sort of cultivate, by masking people, children especially, cultivate deep handicap in social, in handicap in capacity to interact with other human beings.
Yeah.
I don't know if I expressed it
Yeah,
grammatically
absolutely.
correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you like what do you think in terms of as artists, as musicians, I mean, how we can help kind of like rehumanize. What do you think?
Hands, touch,
Yeah.
getting in touch in our senses. That's your Waldorf school, right? That's your
Yeah.
Montessori school, all this educational. Children interact with the world through senses, just like artists do. Speaking back to the child, right?
Right. Yeah.
We are very sensory. We don't end there, because then the intellect come and capacity to analyze and critical thinking, which again, it's all these layers. I always talk about lasagna, like
Yeah.
many layers. But the primal is senses, and
Yeah.
we have to smell each other like animals do.
Right.
That's
It's
how
true.
people fall in love, or
Yeah.
like it's like, oh my god. Yeah, we talked about spices and aromas, right? Scent,
Hmm.
the scent of life.
Yeah.
um how to Well, I'll tell you a personal story. I was several times, because I have pretty kind of analytical mind as well, decided. So I was on this intersection. At some point I wanted to major in philosophy. I still read a lot of philosophy, but I cannot do philosophy for the sake of philosophy.
Hmm.
I'm too much hands-on person. And last moment, what kept me at the piano is, I call myself a cook, not an artist, a cook. It's
Hmm.
that piano for me, it's a material, like a clay. I sculpt with music. It's that
Mm.
sensory touch of the keys and what I can do with sound, how I can sculpt the sound, the phrase, um, the phrase, the gestural, the movement, the in-between notes, the in-betweenness, that fascinates me. That's
Yeah.
cooking.
Yeah.
So for children, any skill that has to do with body, it can be playing an instrument, it can be drawing. I was shocked with when one of the parents told me they canceled cursive writing at school. I don't know if
Yes.
it's true. Is
Yeah,
it true?
it is.
I
Mhm.
think it's tragic
It is tragic. Mhm.
because it's not that, of course, it's more efficient, but it's the slow process, the slowness, that
Yeah.
that that physicality.
Mhm.
That's the creativity. That's getting in touch with the process. So any skill that parents can give their children to get them infected with that cooking, cook together, bake together,
Mhm.
read together, write together, memorize a poem together,
Mhm.
tell the story together, make a play together, make a puppet. I love puppetry.
Mhm.
uh, Make a doll together. Speaking of
Yeah.
doll, but anything,
Garden together, dig in the dirt,
garden, but
watch something
any
grow slowly.
grow slowly, and don't be afraid to feel the dirt in your hands.
Yeah.
I used to eat the dirt as a child. Children loves eating dirt.
Yeah. They need the
The
minerals and the
minerals,
probiotics.
the child.
Mhm.
Yes, like it's insane now. Can you
Yeah.
imagine now these days where everything is like germ free?
Oh my
But
goodness, no.
children need exposure to
They do.
germs.
Mhm.
Speaking of germs, what do you think about, for me, education? It's like that exposure to germs, to kind of provoke immune system. You talked about allergy, to throw the exposure, difficult, controversial,
Yes.
contradictory exposure on all levels to children,
Mhm.
and let them sort of help them to navigate, to
Yeah.
kind of, without giving them answers, do this, do that. But
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
I absolutely agree. I think, my own education, I went to public schools in New York City.
Mhm.
And I don't remember in all of that time anybody ever telling me what to think.
But
I-
you were they threw at you different ideas.
Absolutely. And just the fact of growing up in the city, you were around different ideas all the time. You're around different people all the time. I mean, you had everything all the time, everywhere. So it was like, figure it out,
Figure it
you know,
out.
sort it out. Like, who do you want to be? What kind of, where do you feel like you want to gravitate most toward? Do you, even within being a visual artist, my high school was this magical garden of, of art making, right? But even within that, there was like, well, there was a hierarchy, but I won't talk about the hierarchy. But there were different streams. Like, did you want to be a fine artist, like a gallery oriented artist? I didn't want that. I wanted to be an illustrator. I wanted to make books. So even just being able to articulate, but all of us had the same education. We all had to go through the same foundational classes. It wasn't until I was a senior that I really started to specialize. You have to be exposed to, I'm not talking about anything. I very much believe in the Waldorf ideal too, of like keeping the child in the dream state as long as possible. So you don't wake the child up before they're ready. You let the child slowly emerge into consciousness. That's the approach to learning how to read, right, is
Mhm.
I'm trying to think back, many, many years now, but there's something about like, you don't teach the child to read until they can reach their arm over their head. And that's like a signal that they have like grown and matured enough to be able to handle something like reading, to be able to wake up into that reading. It's like a physical marker.
Yeah.
Now, I taught my kids how to read quite young because I was a young reader myself, and I wanted them to have the access to
Mhm.
all the books that we had in my house. Um, but as a principal, that is so important. Is like, you throw the kid into the pool. How do you teach a child to swim? Okay, you put the floaties on their arms, okay, so they won't drown, but you throw them in the pool, you know,
Yeah.
and they will figure it out. Like that you're there
Yeah.
to provide the boundary, but they will figure it out. They will learn how to swim, you know, and it's just, I don't believe in, it's like we started to say in the beginning, that the more strictures you put on your children as they're starting that individuation process as teenagers, the more they're going to rebel. It's
Mhm.
like they're just going to do it because it's a natural, normal developmental cycle or stage.
And they will do it in an unhealthy way, but
Right.
yeah.
So if you tell the artist what they are allowed to say and not allowed to say, well, let's start there with the artist. Of
Mhm.
course, that applies to everybody in society, but you tell the artist what characters they're allowed to write, what music they're allowed to play. What are they going to do? Some of them will go along and listen, right? They'll just do
Mhm.
what they're told
Mhm.
because they're, you know, easily led. But some of them will swing to really unhealthy places. You know, that's where extremism comes from. You suppress and suppress and suppress, and you deliberately push it underground. That's where harmful movements come from.
That's where
That's
their
where
eruption comes.
radicalization happens.
Yeah. Yeah. How you explain that so many my son is double majoring in business and in theater. And
Oh.
he shares with me interesting observations. Mom, why? And he's puzzled with it. My mom, why people in a theater department hyperactivists, and why people in business school you just don't hear that language at all? People just do their thing. So how you explain the tendency, especially in arts programs, that lean into toward activism?
I mean,
We
I'm
talked
still trying
about
to,
activism. I'm coming back to it, but
yeah. I mean, I'm trying to figure that out. I don't understand it. I'm just not wired that way. At the same time, I will say, uh, I have a very strong commitment toward fighting racism. I'm very, very committed to that. I've been committed to that since I was 9 years old. But how I choose to allow that into my work, like at the end of the day, I'm a storyteller. So whether it's through my writing or whether it's through my illustration, my job is to tell good stories. And I
yes,
do know that some of the worst stories I read are the ones that start with a conclusion.
yes.
And I think that the activist work starts with a conclusion. And they're not good stories. They're just,
It's
they're boring.
amazing because you know it. I have exactly same feeling. It's like you watch a movie or read a book, and you know already how it ends, right?
The characters are flat. They, you know, it just,
Yes.
if I can even make it to the end of the book, I'm just filled with anger.
Yeah.
You know, and I think some people would tell me that that anger is like, you know, I don't know, that I'm fragile or something like that. No, 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 no. It's just that it's a bad story. You know, it's like
Yeah.
there's a lot of bad stories out there. And I don't know, I feel like this is the thing that I can't quite understand is like there are real artists around the world who are suffering under truly authoritarian regimes, who are being doxxed by their governments, jailed, beaten, um, their families threatened, and all they're doing is making art. Okay, they're not even making activist art necessarily. They're just making art that doesn't that's not for
They
the
just grow. They just
regime or whatever.
grow in a garden, right?
Right. You know, and but here we're so fired up in this. I'm not saying that any of these causes are necessarily not worth pursuing in and of themselves, but it's a tone. Do you know what I mean?
It's a tone, let me give you one of the thoughts that I have. You mentioned that slow process of figuring out, right?
Yeah.
So what technology does, especially this year, it's all got accelerated, right? The
Yeah.
pandemic
Mm-hmm.
year. Technology doesn't give this time to figure things out. It feeds, it gives us prepackaged product, right? Same is with certain coursework, right? In colleges, it's already, instead of student choosing the lens or see multiple lenses, it's superimposed lens a priori.
Yeah. There's no
And
discovery there.
no discovery. And if students they're not given the whole array, whole buffet, right? We're speaking about food, whole like potluck of different lenses, they're going to choose this lens, that's the only lens available, and look to everything. And I'm deeply committed to fighting racism and tribalism of any sorts, and in a very much Martin Luther King way, right?
Same.
And I think art builds character. So speaking of what is the solution, can we focus on character? Art builds character. On what builds character? How about that?
So there is there's a verse in the Bible that says that suffering produces character and character produces hope. And I think that, in terms of our discussion, there's the persevering through suffering, that whether the suffering is great or small, it's just about process, right? It's whatever process that you're allowed to develop and that ferments over time. This is something that can't be rushed, like we were saying. And it's an area where, like, when I speak to young artists who are like digital natives, there really is no true deep concept there of process. The process jumps immediately from I draw a pretty picture to I post it on Instagram.
That's
it. And that's it. And my value, like how well I'm doing as an artist, has to do with the performance on Instagram. Now I'm on Instagram and I watch my performance and all of that stuff, but 99% of what I'm creating, like you can see there's works in progress behind me, those aren't going on Instagram. Like 99% of what I create in my studio, nobody sees.
It's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress, and that is vital. It's absolutely, that process is vital.
Sketching.
Yeah.
It's the practice, the repetition, the whole this process. And again, the instruments are still there.
Yeah.
The sketchbooks are there. The pencils are there. It's all available. So we have to reintroduce it back.
Yeah.
It's not, oh, let us go back to Middle Ages and let us shut down all technology and go and all live like happy Amish community, but let us be selective.
Yeah.
Okay, here is an amazing accomplishment of technology, then you and I can talk like that.
Right.
But here, okay, I need to go and do something with my hands to get in touch with myself, with real people out there.
Yeah, when you were talking too about like the senses and the child's need for processing through the senses, this is something I've talked about on my podcast too, that, I'm an artist who I do use some digital technology in my process, like at the end of my process. And particularly in my children's, like my picture book work, I do color digitally, right? But I am working by hand. Even before I go to a final piece, I'm working in my sketchbook. I'm in my garden. I'm practicing piano. I'm cooking. I'm working with clay. I'm doing all these things that are so deeply sensory. And the work that I, the illustration that I create, I cannot draw that digitally. I've tried to work on a tablet. I've tried to work on an iPad. I've tried to find a way into that would make sense for me, but I know myself, I need the sensory information. And I'm concerned for my fellow artists who are leaning so heavily on the end product and on you know, the nice looking package or on meeting the deadline or whatever, that they're like disembodying themselves,
Mhm.
And I remember like when I was coming up in my career, that I often would fight against my body, even especially when you're a student. You probably feel this too as a musician. Like you wish that you could just escape your body to be able to make more art. And it's like, it doesn't really
No,
work that way. You create through your body.
your body is your channel. It's your channel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you
No,
need
you
it.
have to befriend your body. Befriend. Ah, I consider piano and myself like extensions of each other.
Same.
So it's that continuum that fascinates me. It's
Yeah.
not me versus that, but continuum.
Yeah.
And I wonder, it's if you think about love or friendship or any
Mm,
human relationships, I'm big proponent of one-on-oneness, like
yeah.
playing in a duet.
Yeah.
It's that continuum, that
Yeah.
that energy traffic that goes back and forth.
hmm
Remember, like before we started this recording, we agreed, oh, let's just play it back and forth,
Yeah.
because it creates that free flow, the wu
Yeah.
wei. Uh, yeah, I think if you do it on your side and I do it on my side, that's what need to be spreaded more in
Yeah.
education, in public social sphere, and then unnecessarily political excesses will naturally fade,
They become irrelevant,
become
right? Like
irrelevant.
if I assume that when I'm talking to you, if I assume I don't know you, right?
Mhm,
That we're just meeting
mhm.
and that there are like worlds upon worlds inside of you that are available to be discovered depending on how much you choose to reveal and
Mhm.
and open. Same with me. And like I can assume that there's so much to know of you, right? I'm not stopping the conversation at, you know, like I'm taking
Color of the skin.
color of the skin or the brand of glasses that you wear or whatever. Like it's just I don't want to, it's not interesting to me to, and I think that artists, if they really do think about it and get in touch with their true artistic nature, they don't want to do that either. I think it's unnatural to the artist to engage in that kind of thing.
it's it's mental health wise, it's so toxic that the person physically start feeling unwell,
hmm
engaging for a long time in a demagogical pursuits.
hmm
Artists, some people can spend life happily being demagogues, and fine.
Sure.
I'm talking about artistically inclined person,
Yeah.
or artistically not being art, because a medical doctor is an artist to me, a
Sure.
person who is
Yeah.
creative in whatever they do.
Right.
um it it just creates toxic resentment inside of a
Yeah.
person, and
Yeah.
how long one can live with that toxic resentment inside.
Yeah. And
Is
some
it-
people, like you said, they can live for a long time like that, but what kind of person do they become? You
yeah.
know,
Is
I,
there a
I've seen,
person, is there a person left there?
right.
Where is the person?
Right. Yeah.
So
It's a tragedy. I've seen people's personalities change when they kind of adopt this posture. And it's a really frightening thing. It's really like the person disappears, the person you once knew.
disappears, and
Mhm.
I've seen it too. And there's certain doors that cannot be unlocked.
Yeah.
That's it. The key is lost, and well, nothing we can do.
There really isn't. You just have to hope and pray that they choose to unlock the door themselves, choose to pick the lock themselves.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I made a rule for myself. Maybe you'd relate with this, but I'm not going to take my cues from people who are fundamentally unhappy.
That's amazing rule. Amazing. Because you want to be inspired, right?
Yeah. And I'm
I,
happy. I'm a
I'm
happy person.
I'm I'm I feel people, and well, to some degree, and I try to share enthusiastic, inspiring energy with people around
Mm,
me,
yeah.
and I want that energy for myself, that exchange of energy.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
energy is toxic for some reason, I just don't take it.
Yeah.
Whether it comes from a person, from an
Hmm.
institution,
Hmm.
from a certain committee,
Hmm.
establishment, if it's toxic to me, I don't take it.
Right.
And I believe you too. And
Yeah.
I think we all have to just come to certain filter decider,
Yeah.
kind of certain clarity. Okay, what I'm not willing to accept
Yeah.
because it damages my well-being.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And those rules that line can be difficult to articulate. Like I'm trying to understand what my line is. I haven't quite been able to articulate it yet, but this realization about the happiness, that's part of it.
listen to the body.
Yeah.
As I have very pretty, I have strong filtration rational mechanism, right? Of
Hmm.
course. But my immediate impulse inside of me, no, you're not going to make me do that.
Yeah.
So that inner teenager in me is alive and watching, right? That's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
inner teenager. Nope. So
Yeah. Having the right to let your yes be yes and your no be no.
mhm,
And they're your yes and your no.
mhm.
And that's the end of it.
That's why I love hanging out with teens.
Yeah.
I love the energy.
Yeah. That's refreshing.
Okay, Vesper, we're about to wrap up. I don't want to
Yeah.
go. We should continue.
We should do this again. Yeah.
We will.
Yeah.
That will be
It's great.
fun.
Great to meet you.
Great to meet you too. And Vesper, do you want me, how people can find you? Do you want me to post some links for
Yeah,
your
sure.
work?
Yeah, so you can find my books if you just look up Vesper Stamper wherever you buy books. You can find my work. And I'm on Instagram at Vesper Illustration.
Mhm.
And my podcast is called Vesper Isms, and I'm on all the podcast platforms. And we just talk about the artistic worldview, seeing the world like an artist, and getting past the very low resolution political lens, and choosing to see things through, like you said, a polychrome artistic lens.
And let me tell you and the listeners and the viewers that Vesperism, it's the best, most inspiring ism in 20th century, right?
It just means I only speak for myself.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Vesper, I'll see you soon.
Yes. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. How do I stop this?